Bum 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 bum. Hello, Nicholas. Hello, everybody. Come on in here. It's time for another delightful simultaneous sip. And if you're here early, grab your cup, your mug, your chalice, your flask, your tankard, your chalice, your thermos. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for this simultaneous sip. Oh, best one of the day. So, as I often tell you, one of the weird things about being me is that sometimes when I talk about the news, I accidentally become the news. That happened again yesterday. So the Washington Post wrote a hit piece about me talking about the Fine People hoax. Now, the interesting thing, by far the most interesting thing about this whole Charlottesville Fine People hoax is that when people are de-hoaxed, in other words, when you show them the actual transcript and you find out that he did not call the racists fine people, that he actually condemned them and called them out by name, when you show that to people, they go down what I call the hoax funnel. Now, the hoax funnel is when you start with this false claim, somebody proves it's wrong, and then they come to a smaller claim, and you show that that's wrong, and then you come to a smaller claim and a smaller claim. That's what makes it a funnel. So you're talking people out of the big claim, but they go down to smaller and smaller points until there's nothing left. And I want to show you the order that almost every person who's suffering from Trump derangement syndrome goes down, because it's so similar, it's hilarious, and it gives you, this is going to be a perfect lesson on cognitive dissonance, all right? So most of you know the background. If you don't, check my pinned tweet. The basic idea here is that most of the country has been told illegitimately that the president once called the racist marching in Charlottesville fine people. In fact, he did not. We'll not talk about the details of that too much. I'll just take you through the interesting argument. Here's what happens. So this is the fine people hoax funnel. So people start with this belief, this false belief. They think the president referred to neo-Nazis as fine people. So when somebody says that on social media, I send them the transcript and sometimes a copy of the video so that they can see that the president's words said, when he talked about fine people on both sides, it's obvious he was talking about both sides of the statue controversy. And when he specified, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, they should be condemned totally. So I show them the transcript that they're absolutely, completely wrong, objectively confirmed, no question about it, their original belief that the president called neo-Nazis and white nationalists fine people is false. He said literally the opposite of that. Okay. Then what do people do? Do they say, Scott, my goodness, I sure was wrong. Thank you for correcting that. No, nobody ever does that. Instead, they retreat to a smaller claim. And it looks like this. There were no non-racists in attendance. So therefore you're wrong, Scott. There were no non-racists there on the side of keeping the statues. So then I say, well, here's a link to the New York Times article in which they interviewed a woman who was part of a group that were not racist, did not identify with racists, don't like racists. They were there for their own purposes. They were there to protest the removal of a historical monument, and they were pro-free speech. Now, once you've showed them the sources, where it's the New York Times, it's an actual interview with somebody who clearly was not with a racist and said they were there for their own purposes. At that point, does the person you're talking to say, oh, phew, thanks for clearing that up. I had my information wrong, but I trust the New York Times. Here's a detailed interview, not detailed, but enough detail with the person. I changed my mind. They do not say that. They continue going down the hoax funnel. But this is the interesting breakpoint. For the first two claims, generally speaking, I think people are actually have been bamboozled by the media and simply have incorrect information. All right? So the first two are just people dealing with the fact that they don't have the right facts. As soon as you point out the real facts, this is the interesting point, and it happens right here. This is where they add a hallucination. And I mean this literally. It's an actual hallucination. And this is the tell for cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when the facts don't fit your worldview and you're very committed to the worldview. So you have to reinterpret your reality, literally hallucinate, literally add a delusion or an imaginary fact to explain something that has just evaporated in the light of facts. And here's how they do it. They add the imaginary fact that the fine people who were not with the racist had somehow decided to march with them. There is no evidence that any of the people interviewed by the New York Times or anybody else who was there for their own purposes got in line, picked up a tiki torch or even without a tiki torch, and marched with the racists. It's completely not in evidence. So this is the point of cognitive dissonance. It's very easy to spot. They're adding information that's not in evidence. So I usually say, well, that's not in evidence. What is in evidence is that there were various groups who were in the same zip code for their own reasons. Antifa was there for their own reasons. Antifa didn't go to the event because they were in favor of the neo-Nazis. They were there against them. It was their own reason. Likewise, the press was there for their own reasons. The police were there for their own reasons. And then we imagine that there probably were people such as well, we don't have to imagine it because there's an interview with them, but there were people there for free speech and promoting historical monuments, etc. So once you point out that they were in the same zip code and that this is imagination and that they've added an imaginary fact, do they say to themselves, good point, there is no evidence that the people from these other groups were marching with anybody. So at that point, do they say, nah, I changed my opinion, I guess I was wrong? Never, never. They narrow their claim again. And they usually go to this, well, Scott, don't you know this was an event that was led by, and they'll use words like led by or organized by, Spencer, who is an alleged Nazi, neo-Nazi, whatever he is, white nationalist, I'm not sure. And it's true that Spencer organized people to come. Now, if you hear in the news that there's an event pro and con Confederate statues, don't you think that's going to attract people who live locally and want to keep statues, who are not Nazis, who just hear, wait, so a bunch of people, including Nazis, are going to this event. There must be people on both sides. There must be people there representing all kinds of different views. Why don't I go too? If even Nazis can go, why can't I go? So here's the thing. Don't you believe that most people who heard there was a pro and con Confederate statue event figured that there would be all kinds of people there, even if they knew that there would be a bunch of neo-Nazis there? Now, if I heard there were going to be neo-Nazis at a rally for Confederate statues, what would I assume about that? I would assume it would be like every other neo-Nazi event. There would be 12 guys with signs, and everybody else would be ignoring them or laughing at them. Wouldn't you assume that it would be, just 12 losers, just like other neo-Nazi events? I wouldn't even assume it would be an important part of the larger event. I mean, I might be wrong about that, as I would have been, but that would have been my assumption. So when you say to people, reasonable people would have thought that more people were there than that because it was really a typical Confederate statue, pro or con event. There have been others of them. They draw diverse crowds. Wouldn't you expect it to be just like that? And once you point that out, people will say, well, okay, it's possible that some people could have come not associated with the racists. But, and then they narrow their claim a little bit. They say, if you show up at an event with a bunch of Nazis with tiki torches and they're shouting anti-Semitic things, and you don't leave, if you don't leave, doesn't that make you sort of one of them? Notice how the claim gets smaller and smaller? To which I point out that Antifa didn't leave, the press didn't leave, and I would imagine that anybody who came there who did not associate with the Nazis, why would they leave? They came to promote their point of view. They came to see what it was all about. Maybe some were just curious. Personally, would you leave if you came and you saw some Nazis over in the other field and you saw some people ready to fight them and the press was over there and the police were over there and there were tons of people who didn't seem to be in either group, people who were there they were local, they're finding out what's going on, they were there for historical reasons. If you were in that group, would you leave right away? I'm not sure I would. I'd stay and watch what was happening. And I would certainly not think that my freedom of speech had been curtailed because I can see other people doing other stuff. It wouldn't occur to me that I would become a neo-Nazi because I saw neo-Nazis. I'm pretty sure that looking at neo-Nazis doesn't make me a member. So when you point that out, that it's actually pretty reasonable that given there were a lot of people doing a lot of things in one place and they were all there for their own purposes, that nobody's going to leave because some other group they don't like is also there. That's not really a reasonable assumption about all people. Sure, some people might have left. That makes sense, but certainly not all of them. And then people generally narrow their claim. They narrow it again to, yeah, but anybody who's there to support those Confederate statues, they must be Nazis, or they must be at least racists. Now, that is moving the goalposts, because that's not the original claim. There's a big difference between saying that the president called actual marching neo-Nazis fine people, which didn't happen, and when they've narrowed it all the way down to, yeah, but, you know, I think anybody who advocates for statues, no matter what group they belong to, no matter what they say about racism, they must be actual racists. And this is not the original claim. So do people say, okay, you've completely convinced me that my original belief was totally wrong, but the president does say in public that people who support the Confederate statues for free speech or historical reasons are good people. So that's the part he does say. He says that publicly, he said it a number of times. That was never the conversation. Nobody was calling the president a big old racist just because he was on the set. Well, probably some did, but it's not the original claim. So people will say they're still right, even though they've gone to an entirely different claim that the president says often in public, as do other people. Personally, I don't agree with the Confederate statues, but it's true that people are on both sides of it who are not racist. But here's the interesting thing. Having gone through this, fact and logical path, both you and the person you're talking to, hypothetically here, have completely missed the main point of it all. Can anybody tell me what was the main point of it all, and how does this completely miss it? None of this is on point, because the only thing that mattered to the point of the president is what the president's understanding was of who was at this event. If you believe that the president understood that only neo-Nazis were there, or sympathizers, well, then that would be pretty bad that he called them fine people. But in what world do people like you and I, or the president, normal people, in what world do you hear that there's a pro and con event about statues, even if there are neo-Nazis there, Who would think that there are no pro-statue people who are just ordinary people who want to maintain some historical perspective? Who would assume, would the president assume that there were no people there, like every other Confederate statue thing, that there's no people there at all who are just good patriots who like to keep their history? That would not be a reasonable assumption. The worst case scenario is that the president didn't have good detailed information about who was there. Do you know who else did not have good detailed information about who attended? All of us. Then the press didn't know, you didn't know, I don't know, the president's critics, they don't know. Nobody really knows who was in attendance. So to address that, I just sent a message just before I got on here. And just to wrap up that point, if the president believed that there were people there who were not racists, that's all the story requires. It doesn't matter who was actually there. If it was a reasonable assumption, you had it, I had it, most people had it. It was a reasonable assumption that it was a diverse group that probably had all kinds of people there. Now, that claim, of course, is challenged. And just before I got on Periscope here, I sent a message to someone who had contacted me, who was at the Charlottesville event, and purports to not be a racist, and purports to have attended the event for historic preservation, free speech reasons. Now, I've asked him if he wants to go on my app, interfaced by WinHub, and make himself available for anybody who wants to ask, are you a fine person? So if he says yes, I don't know if he will yet. Actually, let's see if he's answering. Hasn't answered yet. I just said it a minute ago. But he has agreed to go public, and he's agreed to take interviews. So it's a real person who was really there, who is not a racist, who you can talk to. And you have to wait to see if he signs up for the app, I'll tell you. But if he signs up for the app, this is my startups app. It lets you talk to an expert on any topic, and the expert can set their price. Now, he can set his price at $0 if he just wants to get his message out, or he can set it at a few bucks, and people will have to pay to find out who was really there. Now, personally, I'd probably charge for it. But any reporter would be able to contact him and say, what do you believe? Were there other people like you there? What did you see? Were you marching with the neo-Nazis, or were you just sort of in the same zip code for your own reasons? So we won't have to wonder. He's already agreed to be interviewed, so he's given me his name. He's gone public to me anyway. I won't give you his name until we decide what's the best way to do it. Or if we ever do. And you'll be able to talk to him, and I've also invited him to be a guest on my Periscope, but there might be a reason that he doesn't want to do that. So, so there you go. Now, let me ask you this. Why am I the one who has to find an actual eyewitness and interview them? Does that make you think there's something wrong with the news business? Ask yourself, given the prominence of this issue, ask yourself, what other news organization looked for people who were there and interviewed them? Now, the New York Times did, but they buried it in a much longer article about the badness of the president. And it was only one person. Do you think there was nobody else? Now, on Twitter, somebody said their niece was there and she's a fine person. And I sent a message to say, does she have any pictures? So and I know at least one other person who I believe to be a fine person who was there, but I haven't contacted that person as well. Somebody I actually knew. I didn't realize that they were there. And So we'll see. We'll find out. All right, here's another changing topics a little bit. I would like to recommend what I call the 20-year rule to apply to all politicians and to all of us. So it should apply to people, but it matters more for politicians. And the 20-year rule goes like this. If you did something bad 20 years ago or more, let's just let it go, because you're not the same person. And it's very important when you've got candidates and a president who are in their 70s, because I'm seeing lots of stories floated to try to embarrass Joe Biden for things he said in the 70s or 80s or whatever, long time ago. And I get why people do it, and politics is a blood sport, and people are on their teams, and and the quotes do seem relevant. They do seem relevant to whether or not he's a progressive or not. But it was 20 years ago plus. I discount everything that anybody accuses President Trump of more than 20 years ago. I discount anything that Bernie Sanders did more than 20 years ago. When Clinton was running for president, I said publicly and often, I discount anything bad she did 20 years ago. And I apply it to Biden as well. So if you want to see consistency, you should come to my Periscope. It's the only place you might see it. Both sides get a pass for more than 20 years ago. Now, I was amused by Joe Biden's announcement in which he laid stake to the claim that he would be the savior of the nation's soul. The nation's soul. Because the soul of the nation, who we are, the national character, he says is being assaulted by the Trump administration, Trump in particular, and that he is in the best position to save us from the degradation of our character and our soul. Now let me ask you this. If the best approach you can come up with against your opponent is literally something that's magic, like a soul, imaginary, I guess I should say, not magic, the nation's soul is kind of imaginary. That's the worst problem. If I were to go to my garage, get in my car, drive to the grocery store, buy some groceries, drive home, cook up those groceries, and eat them, how much did I worry about the soul of the nation? Not really at all. If I get my paycheck, and I put it in the bank, and then I write some checks, and I buy some stuff, how much was I bothered by the degradation of the character of the United States? Not at all. How about right now? You're listening to this Periscope. I'm giving you this Periscope. I'm sipping my coffee. Let's see if I can sip this coffee and manage to enjoy it, given that the soul of the nation and the character of this great country is degrading. Let's test it. Tastes suspiciously the same as before the country's soul was diminished. Try it again. Yeah, that's the same as the pre-2016 coffee taste. I don't think it changed. I don't think it did. And my cat has decided to join me here. Boo. I'm trying to figure out, where does the degradation of the soul of the country, how does that play out in the real world? And I thought, well, obviously it must be destroying the economy. Oh, well, the news today is that the GDP is surprisingly higher at 3.2%, and it's screaming. Okay, so maybe the soul of the nation doesn't really hurt the economy so much, because that's screaming. But obviously our military readiness is better than it's ever been. Okay, so it doesn't directly influence that, but certainly our negotiations with China. Well, no. Our bad soul problem doesn't seem to be having any impact on our negotiations for trade with China. But I'll tell you what, climate change, no, I don't really see the impact. You kind of go down the line. It's a little bit difficult to find out what part of, sorry, cat interrupting, what part of that bad soul is actually affecting us or could affect us. I honestly haven't noticed. I've noticed that the people who are politically very active are quite worked up, but I'm pretty sure that's the media's problem. Not media's problem, but the media's fault. All right, I'm gonna have to. This cat seems to want to get in on the picture. All right, see if she can stay here for a while. I guess not. All right, so how weak and I would say poorly advised is Biden's campaign if he picked the only thing that's imaginary and has no impact on human beings? Now, if Biden had said, I'm going to go in there and get you health care, I'm going to lower your student loans, those are real things. I'll tell you, the main thing that Biden did is make Bernie look like a better candidate. Have you noticed that? Compare Bernie Sanders says, I want to give you free health, universal national health care and free college. Now you say to yourself, well, I don't know how to get there. I just don't know how to, how we can have enough taxes, how you'd ever get that approved. I don't know how to get there. But I don't hate those things, and they're very specific. I mean, if you could get there, wouldn't you like to have good education and good health care for everybody? Just don't know how to get there. Then Biden comes on, and he can't even give you a rational endpoint. How would we even know if our soul was better? When do I know that my national character is moving in the right direction? How much richer am I going to be when my soul is repaired? So pretty weak. The president has referred to Joe as Sleepy Joe. I like it because it sounds like Sloppy Joe. But the president's going after the energy element. He also calls Biden unintelligent. I'm trying to remember if the president has called any of the other candidates unintelligent. Can anybody tell me, of all the many Democrats who are running, is Biden the only one that the president has identified as actually not very bright? I think it's only him, right? Which matters, because if he called everybody dumb, I think Waters is the only other person, what's her first name? Maxine Waters is the only other person that he's called unintelligent recently. I'm probably wrong. I'll bet he's called some other people unintelligent. Anyway, so he says that Sleepy Joe doesn't have enough energy and intelligence to deal with China. And it's funny because these things are going to become what you look for in Biden. So because the president is tuning everybody's brain to look for energy and intelligence coming out of Joe Biden, what do you think we're going to see? He has tuned our brains to look for any situations where Biden does something that isn't smart. Now, what are the odds that we will see things that, at least in our opinion, looks not smart? Biden is the human gaffe machine. Gaffes are almost his brand. So whether or not you call a gaffe a question of intelligence, I would argue usually it's not. It's just slip of the tongue, bad wording. It's going to look like a lack of intelligence. So as a branding, it's pretty powerful. You're going to start attaching everything that Biden does that isn't quite perfect. You're going to attach it to that label because the president has tuned your mind to it. He's also tuned your mind to the low energy thing. Now, I said at first the low energy thing didn't feel strong. My first impression was, because I don't see that in Biden. Biden actually looks to me like high energy. Like he seems like an unusually fit, energetic, strong speaker, especially for his age. So I don't really get that vibe. But here's the brilliant part about it. And I don't know if the president's thinking about it in these terms, but it works to his advantage. By making that something that everybody's looking at, it turns it into something that Biden has to address. Because when your opponent brands you, whatever that brand is, if it starts to stick, or even if it makes people start to think of you in that frame, he has to counter it. Now, what do you do to counter a claim that you have low energy? Think about it. What would you do to counter the criticism that your energy is low? Well, one thing you might do is accuse your accuser. You'd say, no, my energy is not low, your energy is low. But that wouldn't work because Trump is famous for high energy. So you couldn't turn the insult back. So that's the first good thing. The second thing is you either have to, somebody's saying it in the comments, you either have to run yourself ragged like Hillary Clinton did to the point where she couldn't even, she was probably physically and health-wise exhausted by the end of the campaign. So it might be that Trump is actually goading him into working at a pace that won't be good for Biden's health. He is, after all, 76 years old, in great shape as far as I can tell. And again, I like to be the guy who says things that are true and good and bad about both sides. Biden's in really good shape. He's got some good role model stuff going on there. For a man of his age, you just have to compliment that. He's in good shape. So we might see Biden try too hard. So here's the thing. Imagine Biden's personality the way it is now. It's sort of, he has this firm, energetic kind of approach, and he squints too much when he's trying to be serious. This is Biden. I'm squinting to show you how sincere I am. Look at me squint. Oh, I love people who are not white. Oh, he's squinting. It must be true. So he's got that squint thing. But now imagine that the president has branded you low energy. If he goes even a little bit out of his comfort zone, I'm talking about Biden, and tries to add energy to the personality that he's presented to the public for 100 years, he's going to look artificial. He's going to look fake. And he's going to look inauthentic. So if the president can brand him as low energy and cause him to try to increase his energy outside of his own comfort zone, this is very much like a sports trash talk where you just get in the head of the other person and you get them to act in a way that's not their sweet spot. So the president has very cleverly gotten Biden's head and planted a seed with Sleepy Joe that Joe is going to need to show he's got a little more energy than people thought. And that's going to make him look a little bit inauthentic. So it could be one of the best persuasion plays you've ever seen, but we won't really know unless we see if Biden takes the bait. All right. CNN's ran a story today about how Archie Bunker, the old a racist character from, was it the 70s on television? And what does CNN need to do when there's not enough bad news about the president? They actually make up, they associate the president with fictional characters, literally from a television show, because that's just one of the ways that they can brand him badly. He has, the TV show was All in the Family. And one of the characters, the main character, Archie Bunker, his character was a racist. And so they're trying to run stories about Archie Bunker, a 70s television show that could not be less important today because it's sort of all they have. They're kind of running out of stuff to say about the president. So that's a good sign. The president is calling the Russian hoax, Russian collusion hoax, he's calling it a coup, which I agree with that word. I think that word is actually accurate given the facts that are in evidence. Now, it may not have been a massive plot in which they were all conspiring with a leader and they had meetings and stuff like that, but it is pretty clear that there were a whole lot of people who wanted this president out and took steps to make it happen in a way that was outside the electoral process. So that part seems pretty coup-like. He's also said it's worse than Watergate. There are very few things that I can enjoy as much as watching the President of the United States, after the Mueller report comes out, go on television and say that the coup attempt against him was worse than Watergate. It's just delicious. It's the perfect package. Yeah, it's just if this were a movie, that would be one of the movie scenes. You could even end the movie on that. Imagine making a movie, because there will be a movie about this someday. Excuse me. There will be a movie about this someday. Probably several movies about different parts of the president's journey. I think there will be a movie just about the election process. But there might be another movie, might be movie two, about the first term. And you can imagine that the movie for the first term would end with the president going on TV and looking at the camera and saying, "It's worse than Watergate," and just end the movie. Go to credits. Because at that point, the movie would have developed that, in fact, what was done to the president was, in fact, worse than Watergate. I think that's a fair, accurate statement. And after 2 years of pundits saying that the president's actions were worse than Watergate, it would just be a perfect movie ending, where you just see him look at the camera and go, "It was worse than Watergate." Cut to credits. And then, before the final credits, you know how sometimes if it's based on a real thing, you want to have the closing credits before the credits say the actual real life events that happened. They do this with crime movies where they say, "And then somebody pled guilty and served 7 years," or whatever. But at the end, you'd say, in 2019, the president negotiated with China and got a good trade deal. The economy hit, whatever percent. North Korea decided to work with the United States. It would be this list of insane accomplishments, like the kind of accomplishments no president has. Probably I would argue, I'm no historian, but I think there's a case to be made that 2.5 years into this presidency, it's the best first term anybody's ever had, if you look at results-wise. I think there's a strong case for that, a very strong case for that. So it would make a great movie. All right. I hear Democrats are threatening some administration White House officials with jail if they do not agree to investigations. I would like to go on record as saying that I fully support this president and anybody in his administration who resists further investigations on the same topic that Mueller has investigated. Now, if it's other stuff, that's a different issue. But as the president said, and this was very provocative, I don't know if it's true or not. So the president suggested that Mueller must have looked at the president's tax returns. And I thought, first of all, it's fascinating that we don't know the answer to that. And it's even more fascinating that the president doesn't know the answer to that. How in the world do we not know if Mueller looked at Trump's tax returns? Isn't that weird? How do we not know that? It feels like we would know if he did look. Whereas if he didn't look, maybe we wouldn't know. So it does seem like you couldn't really do a Russia collusion investigation without following the money. So whether or not it's true that Mueller looked into Trump's taxes, and whether or not, how deeply he looked, we don't know. Not a damn will Hollywood touch Dilbert. Okay, all caps guy in comments. Um, anyway, so we don't know whether Mueller looked at the tax returns, but wouldn't you assume he did? Because I can't imagine that the investigation was complete unless he looked at least maybe the last year of taxes. I mean, it might not have been every tax return forever, but wouldn't he have to at least look at a few years, find out if there are any entanglements over there? So I love that the president has put that out there, that maybe his tax returns have already been looked at by the best people in the world to look at tax returns, whoever Mueller hired. We don't know. All right. Trump also was, I guess he was on Hannity talking about the Democrat candidates for president, and he was going through the list and saying which ones were irrelevant, which ones were strong. And then when he got to Buttigieg, the president said he was rooting for Buttigieg. He doesn't know if he'll make it all the way, doesn't think he'll make it, but he's rooting for him. So in other words, there was only one candidate that the president unambiguously said positive things about: Buttigieg. Now, isn't that clever? Think about it. Isn't that clever? Because Buttigieg is, first of all, the first openly gay candidate at this level running for president, I think. Um, so the president just says good things about him because he doesn't have to worry about him, and he can get for free. It's like free money laying on the table. He probably doesn't think Buttigieg could be a serious contender for the job. I think he's right. I don't think any of the candidates could be serious contenders. But by being nice to Buttigieg, especially when Buttigieg is fighting, at least in public, he's acting like he's got a problem with Pence, it kind of was perfect. One of the things I love about Trump's approach is that if somebody leaves free money sitting on a table, Trump will pick it up. This was free money. Saying something nice about Buttigieg, being the only one he doesn't criticize, was free money. He probably isn't making Buttigieg any stronger by saying something positive. It's probably the opposite. Um, and he gets credit for being nice to the first openly gay candidate. So he wins on that. It was just a clever play. I noted that Booker and Swalwell, two candidates running for president, two guys, have both said that they will pick a woman as a vice president running mate. What do you think of that? I think that that's a mistake. It's not a mistake to pick a woman. It's a mistake for them politically to claim that. And here's why. We're coming off an election, the last election, in which Hillary Clinton was running for president and got more votes. I mean, she was as close as you can get to president. She actually got more votes and still wasn't president. Swalwell and Booker, I think, are accidentally, they're trying to be positive. They're trying to say that they're inclusive and stuff. So that part seems good. But the thought that they would assign the woman in the second place position doesn't really work as well as it would have if Hillary Clinton had not won the popular vote. Because you don't really think of women in 2019, you don't think of, why, wouldn't it be great if a woman became vice president? Doesn't that feel like too little and too late? If you're a woman and you hear that from a man, yeah, we'll put a woman in second place. That'll make you happy. Would that make you happy? If you're a woman who thinks you should have a woman president, would having two guys tell you that they'll put a woman in an unimportant role of vice president, how in the world does that make you happy? It feels like a step backwards because Hillary was sort of top shelf. Why are these white guys, well, white guy Swalwell and Cory Booker, why are they saying the woman's in the second position? Does that feel right? I know, it feels like there was no right answer because they can't say we won't, but saying that you will kind of doesn't feel right either. I feel like the Democrats lose either way. There's no winning position on the woman as vice president question. All right. Uh, I noted that there's a poll out saying that the world is sadder and angrier than it's ever been. So I think it was a Gallup poll saying that people worldwide, so we're not talking about the United States, but worldwide, people are sadder and angrier than they have ever been. Now, first of all, who knows if these kinds of polls are accurate or really saying what we think they're trying to say. But nowhere in the reports does the news business blame itself. Does it, or social media. Doesn't it seem to you it's not really about the world being a sadder, worse place? Because the world unambiguously is a better place. The world just keeps improving, and it's improving quickly, and it's improving on just about every measure of goodness. Almost everything is moving in the right direction, but people are getting sadder and angrier. Isn't it obvious what's causing that? Now, it might be different if you're talking about some of the African nations who don't necessarily have the same kind of news we have, don't necessarily have social media in as much penetration. But I think if you're looking worldwide, it's pretty much an impact of the business model of the press plus social media, which is ruining all of our attitudes and making us sad and angry. How can it be anything else? Because everything else is going well on average. Not for every person, but on average. All right. Those are the big stories of the day. As I said before, there were two articles yesterday and the day before in which I became part of the news. I talked about the news and then I became part of it because the Washington Post, if you didn't hear the first part of this Periscope, the Washington Post, a writer, it was accusing me of trying to promote the false idea that the president was being mischaracterized with his fine people quote. And they referred to me in the article as far right. That's right. The Washington Post just ran a major opinion piece in which I was called far right. Do you know who else they put in that category in the far right? Mike Cernovich and Jordan Peterson. Now, do you think any of the three of us are far right? I don't think so. That isn't even close to a good label for any of the three of us. There's somebody else on the list. Oh, Steve Cortez. And he would not, in my opinion, would not even close to qualify as far right. Conservative, yes. Yeah, they referred to me as being reinvented as a Trump booster. That part's right, but they earlier in the same piece called me far right. Now, that is as wrong as you could possibly be. Most of my Periscope audience is literally angry at me for for talking about transgenders in sports, which I'm not going to talk about today. For talking about abortion things in the way they don't like, basically all kinds of stuff from universal health care to universal education, although I don't know how to pay for it. So anyway, watching the fake news come after me is a good sign. Now, a lot of you are prompting me in the comments to talk about Ben Shapiro. Now, Ben Shapiro has a nuanced, as I understand it, I hope I don't have the facts wrong, but I saw a little clip of him talking about it. And it looks like his understanding of the Charlottesville fine people situation is a little bit down the hoax funnel. So Ben Shapiro does not believe that the president referred to the actual neo-Nazis as fine people. So he's compatible with the facts that are very clear. He does believe that whoever was there was also marching with, and I believe he used the actual phrase marching with, right? This is the cognitive dissonance point. So anybody you see who says, well, yeah, they can't be fine people if they were marching with, or if they are talked out of the marching with, which is pretty easy to do, they say, yeah, but they attended a rally where it was organized by racists. So I think Ben Shapiro is somewhere down there in the funnel. And, I talked about the hoax funnel where the claim gets narrowed and narrowed. People ask me, you should go talk to Ben Shapiro about that. I believe that if Ben Shapiro talked about this, in something like 4 minutes, we would be on exactly the same page. I say this because Ben Shapiro is smart, and he seems to be, influenced by logic and data, and that if I framed it the way I framed it here on this board, he would probably be on the same page, but be uncomfortable with how the president handled it, which I agree with. If your bottom line is that the president blew his public communications and created a negative thing out of it, we agree. You can't say the president handled this right, even if he said all the right words, because the outcome was bad, and he's responsible for his own communications, even if they're taken out of context. So I agree with Ben Shapiro that the president, I think Ben Shapiro said the Charlottesville thing was the lowest point of his presidency, and we totally agree on that. From the perspective of history, that was absolutely the lowest point of his presidency, which is different from saying he was supporting racists. Now, to Ben, I would say, it doesn't really matter who was there, and it doesn't really matter why they were there. As soon as you start debating who was actually there and were they fine people, you're actually not on the right conversation. It feels like you are, but you've left the conversation without noticing it. The conversation that started this is, what was the president's state of mind, and what was he thinking, and who was he referring to when he said there were some fine people on the keep the statue side? All that matters for whether or not a bad thing happened is what was the president's understanding of who was there. And the reasonable assumption is that the president assumed the same thing I did, the same thing most people did when they heard the story. There probably were very few people in the country who heard that there was an event about Confederate statues. Probably all of us thought it was a diverse group, and probably there was a few people in every imaginable point of view. That is the reasonable assumption. So if you say the president is a reasonable person who made a reasonable assumption, and even the media doesn't know exactly who was there, it doesn't matter who was there. This is the point that nobody could really hear. It doesn't actually matter who was literally on the ground there, or what they were thinking, or if they were racist. All that matters to understand the situation, not all that matters in terms of the impact, but all that matters in order to understand the situation is that the president and everybody who saw the situation in the first few days should have reasonably believed that there were all kinds of diverse people there for diverse reasons. That's the most reasonable assumption and has never been disproven. There has been no detailed reporting of exactly who was there. We don't know. Now, that's why I've offered that one of the people who was there, I'll see if he has answered me yet. I offered that I would talk to him either on Periscope. Okay, I don't have an answer yet. All right. But what will happen to the world if I do a public interview with somebody who was there, is not a racist, and just likes historical statues? Would that interview be presented everywhere? Would everybody be talking about it? It's like, oh, thanks, Scott. I'm glad we cleared that up. There's no chance that actually even interviewing somebody who was there, who, by the way, sent me a picture of himself posing by the statue. So the person I'm talking about showed me a picture of him on the site. So I'm pretty sure it's a real person who was really there. The media would destroy that person, you say. I don't think so. I really don't think so. But it's certainly a risk. All right. I see people prompting me to talk about the president's tweet in which he reversed the I and the E in chief. I'm on the team that says they're probably just real typos. But once he makes them, he probably doesn't care, and they work in his advantage because it draws attention to his tweet, whatever. I don't think he does that intentionally. I think that's exactly what you see. If you look at my tweets, my whole body of tweets, there are spelling errors, there are, words missing. I put the instead of they. I did that yesterday. Just totally normal stuff. So I wouldn't make too much of that. All right, I will talk to you all tomorrow.